We live in an age of total discovery. We've mapped the stars and decoded our DNA. But beneath our feet, there are black boxes of history. Tombs that haven't seen a single photon of light in thousands of years. Usually archaeologists can't wait to dig. But for these 12 sites, the shovels have stopped. From toxic mercury rivers to ancient pathogens and cultural curses, some doors are better left closed. Tonight, we're going where the lights don't reach. These are the 12 ancient tombs scientists are, quite literally, too afraid to open. Let's start our journey in the shifting sands of Saqqara, Egypt. Here lies a mystery that has driven archaeologists to the brink of obsession for over a century: the search for the tomb of Imhotep. Now, if you're a fan of Hollywood movies, you probably know the name Imhotep as a bald telekinetic mummy bringing about the end of the world. But the real man? He was far more impressive and far more terrifying to the status quo of his time. Imhotep wasn't just a priest. He was a polymath, a poet, a physician, and the world's first true architect. He was the mastermind behind the Step Pyramid of Djoser, the first massive stone structure ever built by human hands. He literally invented the pyramid. In his time, he was so revered that he was eventually elevated to the status of a god, the god of medicine. For thousands of years, people traveled from across the ancient world to Saqqara, hoping to be healed by his spirit. We know he existed. We see his name carved into the base of statues of the pharaoh himself. We know he died. But here's the problem. His body, and the treasures he was buried with, have completely vanished. Archaeologists believe his tomb is somewhere near the step pyramid he built. But near is a relative term when you're talking about a landscape honeycombed with thousands of years of tunnels. Recent excavations in Saqqara have uncovered massive galleries filled with millions of mummified ibises and hawks, offerings to Imhotep. This tells us we are close. We are standing on top of him. But scientists are hesitant to take the final leap. Why? First, there's the labyrinth factor. The ground beneath Saqqara is like Swiss cheese. It's a chaotic, multi-layered maze of limestone tunnels, many of which were carved nearly 5,000 years ago. These passages are notoriously unstable. Over the millennia, earthquakes and moisture have turned the rock into a fragile crust. One wrong vibration from a heavy drill, or even the displacement of too much sand, could trigger a domino effect of collapses. To find Imhotep, you would have to risk burying your entire team under millions of tons of ancient debris. But there's a deeper, more atmospheric fear. In the 1920s and 30s, explorers like Walter Emery dedicated their lives to this search. Emery actually died shortly after a grueling season of digging in Saqqara. This fueled the legend of a guardian's curse. Beyond the myth, there's the biological reality. These tunnels have been sealed for eons, trapping stagnant air, ancient molds, and perhaps even localized concentrations of radon gas. If we find him, we find the blueprints of Egyptian civilization. We find the medical texts of a man who was performing surgery when the rest of the world was living in mud huts. But for now, the architect of the pyramids remains protected by the very earth he transformed. Scientists scan the ground with satellites and LIDAR, peering through the dirt with technology, because they know that to enter the labyrinth physically is to enter a trap that Imhotep himself might have designed to be final. If you think the age of big discoveries is over, you haven't been looking at Saqqara lately. Just a few years ago, right in the middle of a global pandemic, a team of Egyptian archaeologists stumbled upon something that looked like a scene from an Indiana Jones movie. They found a series of burial shafts, some dropping 40 feet into the earth. And at the bottom, hundreds of brightly painted wooden coffins, stacked on top of each other like cordwood, undisturbed for over 2,500 years. This is the megatomb of Saqqara. Now, here's where it gets interesting. While the media showed us the dramatic opening of one or two sarcophagi for the cameras, there are hundreds more that remain hermetically sealed, and scientists are surprisingly hesitant to crack them all open. Why would you spend millions to find them, only to leave them shut? The first reason is an invisible enemy: ancient pathogens. You see, when a coffin is sealed as perfectly as these were, It creates a time capsule, not just for the body, but for the air and the organic material inside. We call this a pristine environment, but for a microbiologist, that's a polite term for a biological hazard zone. Inside these sealed boxes, ancient bacteria, fungi, or even dormant viruses could have survived in a state of suspended animation. Our modern immune systems have evolved for 2,500 years alongside modern diseases, but we have zero defenses against a zombie microbe from the late period of ancient Egypt. It's not just a movie plot, it's a legitimate biosafety concern. Then, there's the issue of chemical booby traps. Ancient embalmers weren't just artists, they were chemists. They used a cocktail of resins, bitumen, and spices to preserve the flesh. Over millennia, as these substances break down in a zero-oxygen environment, they can produce toxic gases. Opening a sarcophagus in a narrow, poorly ventilated shaft could release a concentrated cloud of ammonia or sulfur that could overwhelm an archaeologist in seconds. But beyond the physical danger, there is a modern scientific crisis. The preservation paradox. The moment we open a sealed coffin, we destroy the very thing we want to study. The rush of modern, humid, oxygen-rich air triggers an immediate chemical reaction. Colors that have stayed vibrant for millennia can begin to fade or flake off in hours. Fungi can bloom on the bandages of the mummy within days. Right now, there is a heated debate in the scientific community. One side wants to use a keyhole approach, drilling a tiny hole to insert a fiber optic camera and air sampling tools. The other side says we should wait. They believe that in another 20 years, our scanning technology will be so advanced that we won't need to open them at all. We could perform a virtual autopsy without ever breaking the seal. So these hundreds of souls remain in the dark, just as they were intended to be. They are a library of human history, but for now, the books are stayed closed. Because in archaeology, sometimes the most professional thing you can do is nothing at all. We are waiting for a future that is worthy of the secrets they've kept for 25 centuries. Now let's travel east, far from the dusty sands of Egypt, to the misty, emerald forests of Nara, Japan. Here, the landscape is dotted with strange, giant structures called kofun. From above, they look like massive keyholes carved into the earth, surrounded by deep moats of green water. These are the burial mounds of Japan's earliest emperors, the divine ancestors of the oldest continuous monarchy on Earth. But here's the twist. Unlike the pyramids of Giza, which see thousands of tourists daily, the major kofun in Nara are under a total lockdown. No tourists, no cameras, and most surprisingly, no archaeologists. These tombs are wrapped in what we call the Imperial silence. The Imperial Household Agency of Japan treats these mounds not as historical sites, but as private, sacred graves. They argue that disturbing the peace of the departed emperors would be an act of supreme sacrilege. For decades, the scientific community has been knocking on the door, begging for just a glimpse inside, only to be met with a polite but firm no. So what is it that makes everyone so hesitant, or perhaps so protective? It's not a fear of traps or ancient germs this time. It's a fear of the truth. You see, the early history of Japan, between the 3rd and 7th centuries, is shrouded in myth. Opening these tombs could provide the DNA evidence and artifacts needed to bridge the gap between legend and reality. But there is a sensitive theory that haunts the halls of Japanese academia, the possibility that the early imperial lineage might have deep roots in the Korean peninsula. In a region where national identity and historical origins are deeply intertwined, such a discovery wouldn't just be interesting. It would be an earthquake. It could force a total rewriting of what it means to be Japanese. For the authorities, the risk of shattering a national founding myth is far greater than the reward of scientific knowledge. They are afraid that once the seal is broken, the divine narrative might be replaced by a complicated human reality. But there's also a physical fear of irreversible loss. These mounds are essentially artificial islands. Over 1,500 years, they have developed their own unique ecosystems. Rare plants and undisturbed wildlife thrive on these forbidden islands. Archaeologists warn that the moment you drain a moat or tunnel into the side of a mound, you risk a catastrophic structural failure. The water pressure that holds the earth in place would shift, and the ancient wooden chambers inside, which have survived in an oxygen-free, waterlogged state, would disintegrate the moment they touch the air. In 2008, the government allowed a tiny group of selected scientists to enter the outer perimeter of some mounds that they were strictly forbidden from digging. They described the experience as stepping back into a time before time. Today, Nara's royal mounds remain some of the largest blind spots in human history. They are beautiful, silent, and haunting. They remind us that sometimes a nation's need for a sacred mystery is more powerful than the world's hunger for facts. The imperial silence continues, and the secrets of the sun goddess's descendants remain buried under layers of moss and centuries of tradition. We move from the mists of Japan to the heart of China to face perhaps the most formidable tomb ever constructed, the final resting place of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. Most of you have heard of the terracotta army, thousands of life-sized clay soldiers standing guard. But here is the reality. The army is just the lobby. The actual tomb of the emperor, buried beneath a man-made mountain, has never been opened, and scientists are absolutely terrified to break the seal. Why? The first reason is a literal river of death. Ancient Chinese historians recorded that the emperor's burial chamber contains a miniature map of his empire, complete with 100 flowing rivers of liquid mercury, moved by a mechanical system to flow forever. For decades, experts thought this was just a myth. But recent soil tests on the mound revealed mercury levels thousands of times higher than normal. Opening the tomb wouldn't just be an archaeological mission, it would be a toxic catastrophe. One breath of that ancient concentrated vapor could be fatal, and a leak could poison the entire surrounding environment. The second reason is the mechanical snare. Historical texts warn that the tomb is rigged with hidden crossbows, ancient booby traps designed to fire at anyone who dares to enter. While wooden bows might have rotted, the idea of spring-loaded bronze mechanisms or pressure-activated traps still haunts researchers. Even more dangerous is the structural collapse. The tomb is a massive underground palace, and after 20,200 years, the mountain of earth above it is held in a delicate balance. To dig into it is to risk a catastrophic cave-in that would destroy the emperor, his treasures, and the scientists alike. But there is a deeper, more philosophical fear: the perfection of history. Right now, the tomb of Qin Shi Huang is the ultimate time capsule. We know that the moment oxygen enters that chamber, the incredible colors on any remaining artifacts, the silks, the lacquered wood, the murals, will vanish in seconds, just as they did when the first terracotta warriors were unearthed. Scientists are waiting for a technology that doesn't exist yet, a way to see and preserve without ever touching the air inside. The Chinese government has a strict policy: no one enters until we can guarantee 100% preservation. So, the emperor remains in his silent, silver-filled palace, guarded by his clay army and a moat of liquid poison. He unified China in life and in death. He has created a fortress that even modern science is too afraid to conquer. For now, the first emperor's rest remains undisturbed, exactly as he intended 20 centuries ago. For our fifth stop, we look for a man who was so terrifying, the Romans called him Flagellum Dei, the Scourge of God. Attila the Hun. In the 5th century, he led an empire that stretched from Germany to the Caspian Sea, leaving nothing but ashes in his wake. But when he died in 453 AD, not on the battlefield, but on his wedding night, his followers ensured that his final resting place would be the world's most dangerous secret. The legend of Attila's burial is the stuff of nightmares. It is said he was placed within a triple casket, the innermost made of solid gold, the second of silver, and the outermost of hard iron. This symbolized the wealth he conquered, the luxury he commanded, and the iron strength of his empire. But it's what happened after the funeral that keeps scientists awake at night. To keep the location a secret, the Huns supposedly diverted the flow of a river, likely somewhere in modern-day Hungary. They buried Attila in the dry riverbed, and then released the dams, allowing the water to rush back over the grave, erasing it from the face of the earth forever. And the workers who dug the grave? Every single one of them was slaughtered on the spot to ensure no tongue could ever tell the tale. So, why are we too afraid to find him today? The first reason is the hydraulic death trap. If the legend is true, Attila's tomb is buried under centuries of river sediment and active waterways. Attempting to excavate in an active river basin is a nightmare of engineering. You aren't just digging through dirt, you are fighting the immense pressure of water. One mistake in a cofferdam or a trench, and the entire site becomes a muddy grave for the archaeologists involved. The river that protects Attila is still alive, and it doesn't want to give him up. The second reason is the ghost of an empire. Unlike the Egyptians, the Huns were nomadic. They didn't leave behind stone cities or grand monuments. Finding a single grave in the vast Great Hungarian Plain is like looking for a needle in a haystack that's been flooded for 1,500 years. Scientists fear the false positive, spending millions of dollars and years of labor only to find a diverted river channel with nothing inside. But there is also a darker, more psychological fear. Attila was a man of blood. His burial was a ritual of mass murder. Many historians and locals believe the site is heavy with the energy of those executed slaves and soldiers. It is a place defined by violence. Today, archaeologists use drones and satellite thermal imaging to look for anomalies beneath the soil of the Hungarian plains. They see shapes that shouldn't be there, old riverbeds that look unnatural. But they hesitate to break ground, because to find Attila is to disturb a grave that was sealed with the blood of hundreds. They are afraid that some things, like the Scourge of God, were meant to stay buried beneath the rushing waters of history. He conquered the known world by the age of 30, but in death, Alexander the Great became the world's most elusive nomad. For centuries, his tomb was the most famous tourist attraction of the ancient world. Julius Caesar visited him. Augustus placed flowers on his coffin and accidentally broke the mummy's nose. But then, around the 4th century AD, the man who owned the world simply disappeared. The story of Alexander's body is a wild, high-stakes heist. After he died in Babylon, his generals fought over his remains like wolves. Ptolemy hijacked the funeral carriage, diverting it to Egypt. For centuries, Alexander rested in a magnificent mausoleum in the heart of Alexandria, encased in a sarcophagus of solid gold, later replaced by glass when a later king needed the gold to pay his debts. So if we know he was in Alexandria, why are we too afraid to find him now? The first reason is the submerged city. Alexandria is a city built on the edge of disaster. Over the last 2,000 years, a series of cataclysmic earthquakes and tsunamis have caused the royal quarter of the ancient city to slide into the Mediterranean Sea. To find Alexander today, scientists have to dive into zero-visibility waters, navigating through the collapsed ruins of palaces and temples. It's a literal underwater maze where the tides and shifting sands can bury a diver in seconds. Scientists aren't just afraid of the ocean, they are afraid of the sheer scale of the destruction. The second reason is the urban fortress. For the parts of ancient Alexandria that stayed above water, a modern city of 5 million people has been built directly on top. Alexander's tomb is likely buried deep beneath a bustling intersection, a mosque, or a private apartment building. To dig for him, you would have to dismantle the heart of one of Egypt's most vital cities. The logistical and diplomatic nightmare is enough to stop any excavation before it even starts. But there's a more spiritual hesitation. Alexander was more than a king. He was declared a pharaoh and a god. There are local legends in Alexandria that his tomb is protected by an ancient guardian that will bring ruin to anyone who disturbs the King of Kings. While scientists don't believe in ghosts, they do respect the cultural sensitivity. Excavating near the Mosque of Nabi Daniel, one of the prime suspected locations, could trigger massive civil unrest. The fear here isn't just about physical traps. It's about the weight of history. Finding Alexander would be the greatest archaeological discovery of all time, but it would also be a burden. How do you handle the remains of a man who belongs to Greece, Macedonia, Egypt, and Iraq all at once? Today, we use satellite imaging and underwater sonar to peer through the layers of water and concrete. We see shapes that look like royal enclosures, but we hesitate to move the first stone. Alexander the Great spent his life crossing borders and defying limits. Perhaps, in death, he has finally found a border that even modern science is too afraid to cross. Imagine standing in a quiet, rolling field in Norway or Sweden. To the untrained eye, it's just farmland. But beneath the grass lies a fleet of ghosts. We're talking about Viking ship burials. Massive, wooden longships dragged inland over 1,000 years ago to serve as eternal vessels for high-ranking chieftains and queens. In the Viking world, death wasn't an end, it was a voyage. They filled these ships with everything a ruler might need in Valhalla. Fine tapestries, sacrificed horses, golden jewelry, and even smaller boats. For decades, we only found fragments. But recently, ground-penetrating radar has detected several massive, intact ship outlines hidden just a few feet below the surface. So why are we leaving them in the dirt? Why not pull them out and put them in a museum today? The reason is a terrifying scientific reality called the preservation paradox. For over a millennium, these ships have survived because they are encased in a very specific type of dense, oxygen-free damp clay. This clay acts like a natural plastic wrap, keeping the wood from rotting. However, the moment a shovel breaks that seal and oxygen hits those ancient timbers, a catastrophic chemical reaction begins. The wood, which is often as soft as wet cardboard now, starts to dry out and shrink. If we pull them out too fast, these legendary vessels won't just dry, they will literally crumble into sawdust before our eyes. Scientists are afraid because, right now, our preservation chemicals aren't perfect. We are terrified of being the generation that turned a Viking masterpiece into a pile of trash. But there's a second, more modern threat. The algae and bacteria bloom. As the Earth warms, the soil temperature in Scandinavia is rising. This is waking up ancient microbes that have been dormant for 1,000 years. These wood-eating bacteria are starting to consume the ships from the inside out while they are still underground. Archaeologists are in a state of paralysis. If they dig them up, they might destroy them. If they leave them buried, the bacteria might eat them anyway. Then, there is the curse of the waterlogged. Many of these ships are located in areas with high water tables. Opening the ground would require massive pumping systems. If the water pressure shifts too quickly, the entire burial mound could collapse inward, crushing the fragile hull of the ship and any artifacts inside. Because of these fears, we are seeing a new era of digital archaeology. Instead of digging, scientists are using high-resolution scans to create 3D virtual models of what's inside. They are peering through the earth like X-rays, seeing the swords and the bones without touching a single grain of sand. These are ghost ships, in every sense of the word. They are there, we can see them with our technology, but we cannot touch them. We are waiting, watching the soil, and hoping that our chemistry catches up to our curiosity before the Earth finally reclaims its Viking kings for good. For over 4,000 years, Stonehenge has stood on the Salisbury Plain like a giant, silent clock. We've all seen the postcards, the massive sarsen stones reaching for the sky. But for modern archaeologists, the real heart of Stonehenge isn't what's above the grass. It's what's under it. Recent high-tech deep scans have revealed that Stonehenge isn't a lonely monument. It's the center of a vast, invisible city of the dead. Beneath the surrounding fields, hidden from human eyes for millennia, lie thousands of features. Shrines, ritual pits, and most importantly, massive, unopened burial mounds. These are the resting places of the chieftains of the sun, the powerful elite who organized the construction of this megalithic marvel. These tombs are pristine, untouched by looters or Victorian hobbyists. So, with all our modern technology, why are we too afraid to dig them up? The first reason is the structural integrity of the sacred. Stonehenge is a delicate balance of weight and geology. The entire landscape is a complex web of chalk and soil. Geologists warn that the Salisbury Plain acts like a giant, interconnected drum. If you begin a major excavation on the burial mounds just a few hundred yards away, you risk altering the water table or the soil's load-bearing capacity. There is a very real fear that disturbing the ground around the stones could cause the sarsens to shift, tilt, or even collapse. Scientists aren't willing to be the ones who accidentally knocked over the world's most famous landmark. The second reason is the chemical time bomb. Because these tombs are dug into chalk, the preservation levels are unique. Chalk creates an alkaline environment that can preserve bone and organic material in incredible detail. However, this environment is also extremely stable. The moment you introduce modern, acidic rainwater, or even a shift in oxygen levels through a trench, you trigger a rapid degradation of the remains. We're talking about DNA that has been stable for 4,000 years, turning to mush in a matter of weeks. But there's also the sacred landscape philosophy. Modern archaeology has shifted. We no longer see ourselves as treasure hunters. There is a growing fear, an ethical one, that by opening these tombs, we are destroying the wholeness of the monument. Stonehenge was designed to be a landscape of the ancestors, a place where the dead remained hidden to protect the living. Because of this, we are currently in a state of non-invasive paralysis. We use magnetometry and ground-penetrating radar to see the outlines of the bodies, the shapes of their daggers, and the pottery buried with them. We can see the shadows of the past with terrifying clarity, but we stop the shovel at the surface. We are afraid that if we open these tombs, we will find answers that we aren't ready for. Or worse, we will destroy the magic of the question. For now, the chieftains of Stonehenge remain in their chalk cathedrals, and the stones continue to guard a world that scientists can see but dare not touch. On April 15, 2019, the world watched in horror as the spire of Notre-Dame Cathedral collapsed in a sea of flames. But as the smoke cleared and the restoration began, a different kind of fire was lit, a fire of scientific curiosity. Beneath the transept floor, in the very heart of the cathedral, workers found something that shouldn't have been there. A series of anthropoid lead sarcophagi, buried centuries ago and forgotten by history. It was an accidental window into the past. One of these coffins was opened in 2022, revealing the remains of a high-ranking canon, but others remain sealed, resting in the cold shadows beneath the stone. And while you might think the mystery is solved, the scientific community is moving with extreme, almost fearful caution. The first reason is the lead prison. These sarcophagi were made of lead to prevent the spread of odors and bacteria, a common practice for the elite in the Middle Ages. But lead is also a toxic shield. Opening these containers in the confined, fragile environment of an active construction site is a health nightmare. The dust and particles trapped inside for 700 years could be contaminated with high levels of ancient lead or even dormant spores. Scientists are terrified of a secondary disaster, where the effort to save the history of Notre Dame ends up poisoning the people working to restore it. Then, there's the structural ghost. Notre Dame is an engineering miracle, but it is also an old, wounded giant. The foundation of the cathedral is a complex puzzle of soil, ancient Roman ruins, and medieval masonry. These tombs are literally part of the earth that holds up the massive stone pillars. Archaeologists are afraid that if they remove too many of these sarcophagi or dig too deep into the subfloor, they might disturb the delicate pressure balance of the foundation. In the wake of the fire, the last thing anyone wants to do is cause a structural shift that could lead to new cracks in the vaulted ceilings. But there's a deeper, more atmospheric fear: the silence of the elite. These aren't just bodies, they are the people who built the soul of Paris. There is a profound ethical hesitation about disturbing those who were granted the ultimate honor of being buried at the foot of the altar. Today, we use endoscopes, tiny cameras inserted through microscopic cracks, to peer inside. We see the remains of flowers, the glint of gold thread from burial robes, and the preserved hair of people who lived in a Paris we can barely imagine. But for the remaining tombs, the doors are staying shut. We are afraid that by opening them all, we turn a sacred space into a laboratory. Notre Dame is a place of resurrection, but for the shadows beneath its floor, scientists have decided that some secrets are better left in the dark, guarded by the very stones that survived the fire. Deep beneath the dust of the Mexican highlands lies the city of the gods, Teotihuacan. For decades, we marveled at the pyramid of the sun and the moon, but we had no idea that a mirror world existed beneath them. In 2003, after a heavy rainstorm opened a small sinkhole, archaeologists discovered a sealed tunnel leading 60 feet underground, stretching directly beneath the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. It had been intentionally blocked with massive stones and soil nearly 2,000 years ago. When archaeologists finally breached the tunnel using a small robot named Tlaloc-2TC, what they saw felt less like history and more like science fiction. The walls were impregnated with a metallic powder, pyrite or fool's gold, designed to shimmer like the stars in the galaxy when hit by torchlight. But as they pushed deeper, the wonder turned into a toxic nightmare. At the end of the tunnel, they discovered a miniature landscape of mountains and valleys, with pools of liquid mercury representing lakes and rivers. This is the primary reason scientists are too afraid to move forward. Mercury is one of the most toxic substances on Earth. In a closed, humid underground environment, it vaporizes, filling the air with invisible, odorless, and deadly fumes. Even with advanced hazmat suits, the risk of a leak or a suit failure in those tight, jagged passages is a life-or-death gamble. Why was the mercury there? We believe it was meant to represent the underworld river. But the mystery goes deeper. Scattered throughout the tunnel are hundreds of strange, golden spheres. These yellow orbs are made of clay but coated in jarosite, giving them a brilliant metallic finish. We have no idea what they represent. Are they stars? Are they offerings? Or are they part of a complex ritual machine we don't understand? Archaeologists are standing at the threshold of what could be the royal tombs of the Teotihuacan rulers, leaders whose names and faces are lost to time because they left no written records. But to reach those final chambers, they must navigate a swamp of liquid metal. Beyond the chemical danger, there is the structural trap. The tunnel was designed to be a one-way trip. The builders used layers of shaped soil and stone that have become unstable over 2 millennia. One wrong move, one heavy vibration, and the city of the gods could reclaim its secrets by crushing anyone inside. So for now, the work has slowed to a crawl. Scientists are using remote-controlled robots to peer into the darkness, afraid to breathe the air, afraid to touch the golden stars. Teotihuacan remains a place where the barrier between the living and the dead is made of shimmering poison and golden shadows. High in the cloud forests of the Andes, there is a mystery that has lasted for 5 centuries. We know the Inca as the masters of stone, the builders of Machu Picchu. But what most people don't realize is that the greatest treasures of the Inca Empire, the mummified bodies of their sun kings, have never been found. When the Spanish conquistadors invaded Cusco, they weren't just looking for gold. They were looking to destroy the spirit of the Inca. To the Inca, their deceased emperors weren't truly dead. They were treated as living deities, brought out to festivals, fed, and even consulted for advice. To save their living gods from Spanish desecration, the Inca loyalists smuggled the royal mummies out of the city and vanished into the impenetrable wilderness of the Vilcabamba Mountains. Today, we believe these sun kings are resting in cliff-hanging tombs carved into vertical rock faces thousands of feet above the jungle floor. So, why are we too afraid to bring them home? The first reason is the vertical death trap. Archaeology in the Andes is not about digging in the dirt, it's about high-altitude mountaineering. These tombs were designed to be unreachable. To access them, researchers have to rappel down crumbling shale cliffs where the wind can gust at 50 miles per hour. One frayed rope, one loose rock, and the expedition ends in a 1,000-foot fall. It is a place where the geography itself acts as a guardian, and many scientists have decided that no discovery is worth a human life. The second reason is the microclimate of rot. Inside these high-altitude caves, the humidity of the Amazon meets the freezing air of the peaks. This creates a very specific, fragile balance. If we breach a sealed cave tomb, the sudden change in air pressure and moisture can cause the ancient textiles and the fragile mummy bundles to literally disintegrate. We are afraid that by trying to save the kings, we will accelerate their final disappearance. But there is also a spiritual resistance. The local Andean communities still feel a profound genetic connection to these sites. They view any attempt to remove the mummies as an act of war against their ancestors. For a scientist, a mummy is a data point. For a local, it is a grandfather. To avoid a cultural and political explosion, many excavation permits are denied or never even requested. So for now, the Sun Kings remain in their granite thrones, staring out over the clouds. We use powerful zoom lenses and LIDAR from helicopters to spot the stone doors hidden by vines. We know they are there, wrapped in their finest vicuña wool, surrounded by gold that the Spanish never touched. But we stay on our ropes, peering from a distance, too afraid to disturb the final, lonely majesty of an empire that refused to die. Finally, we travel to the edge of the world, the Altai Mountains in Siberia. This is a land of brutal beauty, where the permafrost has acted as a giant, natural deep freezer for over 2,000 years. Hidden beneath the frozen steppe are the tombs of the Pizarric people, nomadic horsemen who once ruled these plains. What makes these tombs different from anything else on Earth is the ice. When these warriors were buried, water seeped into the burial chambers and froze solid, creating a time capsule in a block of ice. In the 1990s, when archaeologists opened one of these mounds, they found the Ice Maiden. She was so perfectly preserved that you could still see the intricate blue tattoos of mythical griffins and stags on her skin. It was a discovery that shocked the world. But today, scientists are increasingly afraid to open any more. The first reason is the biological time bomb. As the global climate warms, the Siberian permafrost is melting at an alarming rate. Inside these frozen tombs aren't just bodies. There are ancient bacteria and viruses that have been asleep for millennia. There is a legitimate fear among epidemiologists that by defrosting these tombs, we might accidentally release a prehistoric pathogen, something like a localized strain of anthrax or an ancient flu that the modern world has no immunity against. To open a tomb today is to risk a biological spill that no one is prepared to contain. The second reason is the curse of the earth. After the Ice Maiden was removed from her tomb in 1993, the Altai region was hit by a series of devastating earthquakes and strange weather patterns. The local indigenous people, the Telengits, were furious. To them, the maiden was a guardian of the gate to the underworld. They believed that removing her broke a spiritual seal that kept the earth stable. The local government has since passed strict laws, and now the political and social pressure to leave the remaining warriors in the ice is immense. But there is also a scientific race against time. When you defrost an ice mummy, the degradation is almost instantaneous. The skin, once as supple as leather, can turn to black rot in hours if the temperature isn't perfectly controlled. Many archaeologists are afraid that we don't have the mobile technology to preserve these warriors at the dig site. If we can't save them perfectly, we shouldn't touch them at all. And so, across the vast Siberian plains, hundreds of mounds remain untouched. Inside, frozen kings and tattooed queens are still clutching their gold-handled daggers and wooden shields, encased in the very ice that is slowly melting away. Scientists watch from a distance, using thermal sensors to monitor the ice. They are caught in a heartbreaking dilemma. If they don't dig, the sun will melt the ice and destroy the bodies. If they do dig, they might release a plague or trigger the wrath of a people who just want their ancestors to sleep. In the end, Siberia reminds us of the most uncomfortable truth of all. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for history is to leave it exactly where we found it. In our quest to uncover every secret, we've learned that some doors are guarded by more than just stone and dust. They are protected by biology, by unstable physics, and by the heavy weight of human belief. These 12 tombs remind us that the past isn't just a library to be raided. It's a living legacy. Maybe we aren't just too afraid to open them. Maybe we are finally becoming wise enough to respect the silence of the dead. Until next time, keep your curiosity alive, but leave the gates closed.